Welcome to AmeenAcademy.com. Let us see history of British Raj. Some introduction we'll see. The British Raj was the period of British rule in India from 1858 to 1947. Here are some key events during this time. In 1857, the Indian Rebellion, also known as the First Indian War of Independence, led to the end of the East India Company's rule in India. The British government took over the administration and establishment of British Raj. In 1858, the British Crown took over India from the East India Company and Queen Victoria became the ruler. In 1876, Queen Victoria took the title Empress of India. In 1880s to 1890s, the middle class and the Indian National Congress became prominent. In 1905 to 1911, the partition of Bengal, Swadeshi, and violence occurred. In 1914 to 1918, the First World War, Lucknow Pact, and Home Rule leagues were prominent. In 1947, India and Pakistan gained independence from Britain, ending the British Raj. The British Raj was characterized by the three stages: mercantilism from 1757 to 1813, and laissez-faire 1813 to 60, and finance imperialism 1860 to 1947. The term Raj comes from the Sanskrit word Raja, which means the king. The British Raj was the period of British rule over the Indian subcontinent from 1858 to 1947 establishment. The British Raj began after the Indian Rebellion of 1857 when the British Crown took over the administration from the British East India Company. The British Raj brought about many changes, including the introduction of new education system and industrialization. Independent movement. The Indian National Congress was founded in 1885 as a secular political party, and Mahatma Gandhi's non-violent opposition to British rule inspired people around the world. When India gained the independence in 1947, the British divided the region into two sovereign states, India and Pakistan, based on the religious and ethnic lines. This led to violence and conflict that continues today. Even today, it continues somewhere else. Legacy. The British Raj left behind a legacy of architecture, including European-style churches, railway stations, and museums. The British also introduced railway to the subcontinent. Now we will talk about more about British Raj. The British Raj, period of direct British rule over the Indian subcontinent from 1858 until the independence of India and Pakistan in 1947. The Raj succeeded management of the subcontinent by the British East India Company. After general distrust, the dissatisfaction with company leadership resulted in a widespread mutiny of Sepoy troops in 1857, causing the British to reconsider the structure of governance in India. The British government took possession of the company's assets and imposed direct rule. The Raj was intended to increase Indian participation in governance, but the powerlessness of Indian to determine their own future without the consent of British led to an increasingly adamant national independence movement. Though trade with India had been highly valued by Europeans since ancient in times, the long route between them was subject to many potential obstacles and obfuscation from middlemen. making trade unsafe, unreliable, and expensive. This was especially true after the collapse of Mughal Empire and, the rise of Ottoman Empire, all but blocked the ancient Silk Road. The European, led by the Portuguese, began to explore maritime navigation routes to bypass middlemen. The distance of the venture required merchants to set up fortified posts. The British entrusted this task to the East India Company, which initially established itself in India by containing permission from local authorities to own land, fortify its holdings, and conduct trade duty free in mutually beneficial relationships. The company territorial permanency permanency began after it became involved hostilities, sideline rival European companies, and eventually overthrowing the Nawab of Bengal and installing a puppet in 1757. The company's control over Bengal was effectively consolidated in the 1770s when Warren Hastings brought the Nawab's administrative offices to Calcutta under his oversight. About the same time, the British Parliament began regulating the East India Company through successive Indian Acts, bringing Bengal under the indirect control of the British government. Over the next 8 decades, the series of wars, treaties, and annexation extended the dominion of the company across the subcontinent, subjugating most of India to the determination of British governors and merchants. Now, Queen Victoria. The Queen Victoria became the first Empress of India in 1877. How it happened? The British Parliament passed the Royal Titles Act of 1876, which gave Queen Victoria the title. Conservative Prime Minister Benjamin Disraeli supported the title. The title was a way to strengthen the connection between the monarchy and the empire and to tie India more closely to Britain. Queen Victoria was more than a figurehead. She influenced Indian politics and society, commissioned artists and photographers, and sent her sons as ambassadors. The Empresses of India Medal, also known as his KAH Medal, was awarded to mark the proclamation. It was the first wearable medal issued to commemorate an event in the British Empire. Next, we'll talk about Sepoy Mutiny of 1857. In late March 1857, the Sepoy, Indian soldier in the employ of the East India Company named Mangal Pandey attacked British officers at the military garrison in Barakpur. He was arrested and then executed by the British in early April. Later in April, Sepoy troopers at Meerut, having heard a rumor that they would have to bite cartridge that had been greased with the lard of pigs and cows forbidden for consumption by Muslims and Hindus, respectively, to ready them for use in their new Enfield rifles. Refused cartridge. As punishment, they were given long prison terms, fettered, and put in jail. This punishment incensed their comrades, who rose on May 10, shot their British officers, and marched to Delhi, where there were no European troops. There, the local sepoy garrison joined the Meerut men, and by nightfall, the aged pensionary Mughal Emperor Bahadur Shah II had been nominally restored to power by a tumultuous soldiery. The seizure of Delhi, provided by a focus and set the pattern for the whole mutiny, which then spread throughout northern India, with the exemption of the Mughal emperor and his sons and Nana Sahib, adopted son of the deposed Maratha Peshwa. None of the important Indian principals joined the mutineers. The mutiny official came to end on July 8, 1859. The rebellion caused by a number of factors, including new cartridge. Rumors spread that the cartridge for the patent 1853 Enfield rifle were greased with a pig and cow fat. Sepoys were required to bite off an end of the cartridge to load the rifle. British officers were seen as culturally and radically intensive. Sepoys felt they were not being promoted. Annexation of native states. The British East India Company annexed native states. Policy of layers. The British East India Company took the lands of any ruler who died without a male heir. Religious practices. British legislation interfered with the traditional Hindu and Muslim religious practices. The rebellion was ultimately unsuccessful, but it led to the British dissolved the East India Company and taking over governance of India. The rebellion and the violence it caused had a lasting impact on Anglo-Indian relations. After rebellion happened, the immediate result of the mutiny was a general houseclimbing of the Indian administration. The East India Company was abolished in favor of the direct rule of India by the British government in concrete terms. This did not mean much, but it introduced a more personal note into the government and removed the unimaginative commercialism that lingered in the court of directors. The financial crisis caused by the mutiny led to reorganization of the Indian administration's finances on a modern basis. The Indian army was also extensively reorganized. Another significant result of the mutiny was the beginning of the policy of consultation with Indians. The Legislative Council of 1853 had contained only European and had arrogantly behaved as if it were a full-fledged parliament. Parliament. It was widely felt that the lack of communication with Indian opinion had helped to precipitate the crisis. Accordingly, the new Council of 1861 was given an Indian nominated element. The educational and public works programs, roads, railways, telegrams, and irrigation continued with the little interruptions. In fact, some were stimulated by the thought of their value for the transport of troops in a crisis. But intensive British imposed social measures that affected Hindu society came to an abrupt end. Finally, there was a effect of mutiny on the people of India themselves. Traditionally, society had made its protest against the incoming alien influences, and it had failed. The princes and other natural leaders had either held aloof from the mutiny or had proved for the most part incompetent. From this time on, serious hope of revival of the past or an exclusion of the West diminished. The traditional structure of Indian society began to break down it and was eventually superseded by a westernized class system, from which emerged a strong middle class with a heightened sense of Indian nationalism. So far, we discussed about some introduction about Sepoy mutiny and about in British Raj. We have done. Please subscribe our YouTube channel.